You know how this works. We take those fascinating excerpts you send in and really try to unpack them in a way that just reading the book sometimes you miss.
It's like we're looking for those hidden gems, tales that really make a story come alive.
And today we're diving into George Romola. Quite a world she created in this.
Well, absolutely. It's got everything you could want in a story, really. We're talking about scholars obsessed with the past. We've got political intrigue, romance betrayal. You name it, it's in there.
15th century Florence was definitely a happening place, at least according to George Eliot.
And Eliot really knew how to capture the spirit of a place and time. She did her research, you can tell.
Right. One of the things that really struck me about these excerpts is the contrast between these different worlds that exist within the story. Like on one hand, you have these scholars like Bardo who were completely immersed in the world of books and ancient texts.
It's almost like they'd rather spend time with the great dead than with living, breathing people.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But it's more than just a preference, right? It's like these books are their lifeline.
Exactly. Remember that quote from Petrarch that Bardo uses to describe his love of books?
Something about them being like friends, right?
They delight us deeply. They converse with us. They consult with us and join with us in a living and sharp familiarity. Pretty powerful stuff.
So for Bardo, it's like these books aren't just objects. They're companions. They offer him solace and wisdom.
An escape, I think. It's almost as if he's trying to shut out the chaos of the world around him by retreating into these ancient texts.
Which makes you wonder, how much is he really missing out on by doing that?
Yeah.
It's
a good question. It's like that age-old dilemma, right? How do you balance a love of knowledge and learning with actually living in the world?
Yeah, and that feels incredibly relevant even today. Right. I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with information, headlines, social media. It's like we're all drowning in data. But are we really connecting with the world around us?
It's easy to get lost in the pursuit of knowledge and forget that there's a whole world out there waiting to be experienced.
And sometimes that world comes knocking, whether you're ready for it or not, like with Romola.
Ah, yes, Bardo's daughter.
And I have to say, I was pretty shocked by how Bardo treats her, He basically dismisses her intellectual capabilities. Says the feminine mind isn't suited for scholarly pursuits.
It's definitely jarring to read that, especially from a modern perspective.
Yeah, even for the 15th century, it feels harsh.
Well, remember, George Eliot was known for her social commentary. She wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
So maybe she's using Bardo to critique the prevailing attitudes of the time.
Precisely. She's highlighting the limitations that society placed on women, particularly when it came to intellectual pursuits.
And the way Romola faints while searching for references for her father, it's almost like she's literally collapsing under the weight of those expectations.
That's a great observation. It's like she's being suffocated by this world that tells her she's not capable of intellectual pursuits.
And then enters Tito Malema stage, right?
Ah, yes.
The young, handsome Greek scholar.
Talk about a breath of fresh air. He sweeps into Romola's life, and it's like suddenly everything changes.
Remember how his arrival is described? A wreath of spring drops suddenly in Romola's young but wintry life.
So poetic. Right, like he's this burst of color and energy in a world that felt very monochrome up to this point.
And that imagery really hints at the dramatic impact Tito's going to have on everyone he encounters.
But there's something about him that makes me uneasy. Like he's almost too perfect, too charming. You know what I mean?
I think you're picking up on something important there. Remember, George Eliot was a master of character development. She rarely presented things in simple black and white.
So you're saying there's more to Tito than meets the eye?
Let's just say that beneath that charming exterior, there might be some darker currents flowing.
Like how Bernardo del Nero is immediately skeptical of him? Right. He even questions Tito's short name and his Medici connections.
Ah, yes. Bernardo del Nero, a prominent figure in Florentine society. He's not easily fooled by appearances.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I was a little lost on that whole Medici connection thing. Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. Well, the Medici family were basically the power players in Florence at the time. Think bankers, politicians, patrons of the arts. They were the ones pulling the strings behind the scenes.
So Bernardo's basically suggesting that Tito might be mixed up in all that.
Exactly. He's sensing that there's more to Tito's story than he's letting on, and that his arrival in Florence might not be entirely.
This intriguing mix of romantic intrigue and political maneuvering.
Precisely. And it really highlights the collision between those different worlds we were talking about earlier.
Right. Bardo might be content to stay holed up in his library. But Romola, and especially Tito, are going to be forced to navigate the complexities of Florentine society.
where appearances are everything and trust is a fragile commodity.
And then there's Tito's encounter with Tessa, the young peasant girl.
Ah, yes. That's a pivotal moment in the story. It reveals a lot about Tito's character.
The way he seduces her,
Yeah.
it's so casual. It's almost chilling.
It shows that he's not afraid to take advantage of someone's innocence, especially if it serves his own purposes.
And he's so averse to conflict, right? Like, he'd rather take the easy way out, even if it means hurting someone else.
Exactly. He wants to float through life on a wave of charm, avoiding any kind of unpleasantness or responsibility.
Which makes you wonder, can someone truly be good if they're constantly running away from the difficult parts of life?
It's a question that Eliot explores throughout the novel.
So we've got this incredibly complex character in Tito Charming, yet potentially deceitful, ambitious, yet seemingly shallow. How do you think his arrival is going to impact Romola?
Well, she's already struggling to find her place in the world,
Right.
torn between her duty to her father and her own intellectual curiosity.
And now she's got this incredibly charismatic man who's turned her world upside down.
It's a recipe for both excitement and danger.
And speaking of danger, let's talk about Baldassare, Tito's long-lost foster father.
Oh, yes. He's a fascinating character, a real force to be reckoned with.
Arrives in Florence, searching for Tito. Believes his foster son abandoned him after being shipwrecked.
And he ends up imprisoned. The Florentines treat him terribly.
It's shocking the way they make light of his situation. It's like they have no empathy whatsoever.
It's a reminder of how harsh and unforgiving society could be back then, especially for outsiders.
But Baldassare's arrival also throws a wrench into Tito's carefully constructed image.
Right, absolutely. It's like a crack in the facade. A hint that Tito's past might not be as pristine as he'd like everyone to believe.
So we've got this tangle of relationships, hidden tensions. Things are definitely heating up.
And just when you think it can't get any more complicated, King Charles VIII of France decides to march into Florence.
Let's talk about bad timing.
It's like political landscape is about to get even more turbulent.
Yeah, and then there's Savonarola, this fiery preacher who's calling for repentance and reform.
He's a fascinating figure, a real historical person who had a profound impact on Florence.
The excerpts mention the bonfire vanities, people burning their luxury items as a sign of their commitment to a simpler life.
It was a time of great religious fervor, and Savonarola was a master at tapping into that.
But there's also a sense of foreboding, right? Like things are about to get a lot more dangerous.
Savonarola's rise to power creates this undercurrent of tension and uncertainty, and it's going to have a ripple effect on all our characters.
It's amazing how George Eliot weaves these larger historical events into the intimate stories of her characters.
She was a master at showing how history shapes individual lives.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover in these excerpts.
We've laid the groundwork, introduced the players. Now it's time to see how the drama unfolds.
So much happening already.
Okay.
And we left off with Florence kind of bracing for a storm, right? King Charles showing up, Savonarola's influence growing, and Tito right in the thick of it all.
It's like he went from this outsider to being completely entangled in Florentine society almost overnight.
Yeah, and not always in the best ways either. We see him making some pretty questionable choices, excerpts.
His ambition really starts to take over, and he's not afraid to manipulate people to get what he wants.
Like his alliance with Dolfo Spini. That guy seems like bad news.
He is definitely ruthless and power hungry, not someone you want to get on the wrong side of.
But Tito seems to think he can use Spini to his advantage.
Which is a dangerous game to play because Spini is not someone who's easily controlled.
And then there's the whole Savonarola situation. Tito's trying to stay in his good graces too, right?
He's trying to play both sides, trying to appeal to both the worldly and the spiritual factions in Florence.
But how long can he keep that up? It seems like it's only a matter of time before he has to choose a side.
And any choice he makes is going to have consequences.
Especially for Romola and Tessa. He's basically leading a double life, right? Married to Romola, but still involved with Tessa.
It's a classic case of deception, and it's going to have a devastating impact on both women.
It makes you question his character, doesn't it? Like, can you really trust someone who's capable of that kind of duplicity?
It's a question that Eliot wants us to grapple with. She's not giving us easy answers.
And then you have Baldassare escapes from prison and he's on a mission.
Revenge is all he can think about. He's consumed by it.
The excerpts describe his mental state deteriorating. It's actually quite sad.
He's so fixated on getting back at Tito that he's losing sight of everything else.
It's like he's becoming a shell of his former self.
And it raises some interesting questions about the nature of justice and revenge. Is revenge ever truly satisfying, or does it just lead to more pain and suffering?
It's a classic dilemma,
Yeah,
and one that's still relevant today.
definitely.
But amidst all this chaos, there's Romola makes a pretty dramatic decision, doesn't she?
She flees Florence.
It's like she's reached her breaking point. She can't take it anymore.
She's seen the ugly side of Florentine society, the corruption, the hypocrisy, and she needs to get away.
And her journey down the Arno River sounds like a baptism, right?
That's a great way to put it. She's washing away the past, trying to start anew.
And she ends up in a plague-stricken village, of all places.
It's a complete contrast to the world she's come from.
But it's also a place where she can truly confront the realities of life and death.
She's forced to face her own mortality and the fragility of human existence.
And she chooses to stay, to help the sick and the dying.
It's an act of incredible compassion and selflessness.
It's like she's finding her true purpose in the midst of all this suffering.
It's a powerful transformation.
So while Florence is consumed by political intrigue and Tito's tangled web of deceit, Romola is on this completely different journey.
Two parallel paths, both shaped by the turbulent times but leading in opposite directions.
And the question is, will those paths ever converge again?
And if so, what will the consequences be?
We left Romola in that plague-stricken village, kind of finding herself. And meanwhile, back in Florence, things are getting even more complicated.
Well, Florence is a powder keg at this point. Savonarola has been executed. There are riots, factions vying for power. It's all very volatile.
And Tito right back into the middle of it.
Oblivious as ever. It seems like he actually believes he can just waltz back in and everything will be fine.
But we know that's not going to happen, right? There are too many loose ends, too many secrets waiting to be revealed.
And Baldassare is out there lurking in the shadows. He's not going to let Tito get away with what he's done.
The excerpts mention him gaining entry to the Rucellite Gardens, where Tito's attending some kind of gathering.
He's closing in. It's only a matter of time before they come face to face.
And I have to say, it's a little terrifying, the way he's described. It's like he's become this force of nature.
He's been driven to the brink by Tito's betrayal, and he's not going to rest until he gets his revenge.
But does he really think revenge is going to bring him peace?
It rarely does, but when you're consumed by rage, it's hard to see clearly.
So what about Romola? Where does she fit into all this?
Well, the excerpts don't give us all the details, but they suggest that she's returned to Florence.
After all that she went through, why would she go back?
I think she has unfinished business. She needs to confront her past.
Makes sense. She can't run from it forever.
And she's not the same woman who fled Florence, remember? She's been transformed by her experiences.
So she's going to face Tito.
It seems inevitable they're on a collision course.
And it's not going to be pretty.
No, I don't think so. There's too much pain, too much betrayal.
But maybe some good can come out of it. Maybe some kind of redemption.
It's possible. But Eliot doesn't make it easy for her characters. They have to work for it.
That's what makes her writing so compelling. She doesn't shy away from the complexities of human nature.
And she leaves us with some tough questions to ponder. Like, what is true justice? Can we ever accept the consequences of our actions? Is redemption even possible?
Big questions. And I don't think there are any easy answers.
But that's the beauty of great literature. It makes us think. It challenges our assumptions. It makes us feel.
And Romola definitely does all of that.
It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
So if you haven't already, I highly recommend checking it out.
You won't be disappointed. It's a journey worth taking.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But I hope it's inspired you to delve a little deeper into the world of Romola and to keep those excerpts coming. We love exploring these amazing works of literature with you.
And who knows? Maybe we'll even uncover some hidden gems that we missed.
Until next time. Happy reading.